Howdy. We're here again talking about Christians and politics, and we're going to discuss this idea of compassion. I do believe that compassion is a part of our political persuasion. There are people who talk about loving others and loving God, and that compels us to make a change in society. And so I think this is a very strong motivator, but I also believe that compassion should be proper and biblical, and sometimes it's hard to know what to do regarding compassion. So to set the stage, we're going to look at in Luke chapter 10 on how Jesus was dealing with a man about this idea of loving God and loving others. So he asked him about the commandments, and the reply was that the two highest commandments were to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and thy neighbor as thyself. Just let's talk a few minutes about how those two intertwine with one another, that in order to love God, you need to love your neighbor as well, and one must lead to the other, which is what eventually we'll find out is Jesus's point.
You want me to answer that?
Yes.
It's so easy. It's not a big deal at all. It's one of the easiest things we do. That idea of loving your neighbor, in other parts of Scripture, in Luke 6, you get to see that Jesus actually makes the point of, hey, what benefit is it to love the lovely? It's loving those who are unkind. It says even God loves the unthankful and the evil. And that's a very hard thing for us to gather, that God even loves them. And we've probably all had bad neighbors at one time, but God wants us to love those people too. And certainly politically, when you're looking in the ether, there's a lot of people you don't want to love. I love going to the farmers market, and I think it's such a menagerie of people. And I think it's healthy for me to go there just to see that there's other people out there. And we're compelled to love those people. It's not a suggestion. In fact, Christ only gives two laws, and what are they? Love God, love people. That's the law of Christ. All the laws distilled down are found in those two things. And super, super hard to practice.
So the man tries to cover up the deficiency in his love for others by focusing primarily on his love for God. And Jesus then begins to explain how they're intertwined, as we already said, by giving the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he wants to bring out that loving our neighbor is connected to our love for God, and there must be compassion for others. So the story, most of you know it, a man is traveling, he falls among thieves, and he's wounded, and then three people pass the way, the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan. And the Samaritan is the only one who actually extends real compassion. He binds up the wounds, he puts him on his own beast, and he takes him to an inn, and then there's a fourth person involved. Not just the wounded man or the Levite, the priest, or the Samaritan, actually be fifth person. The fifth person is the innkeeper, and he's involved in his care. And so just some general lessons from that story. First of all, just the fact of emphasizing compassion, love for others. How would the world be different if we had more compassion?
Oh, that's obviously a big thing, right? To say, yeah, I'm compassionate, all that. How much different would it be if we took time to do it? The idea of, I'm not actually trying to win an argument. I'm trying to be a blessing and a help to somebody. It's a total paradigm shift. And we're a very competitive people. And so we want to, sports-wise, how much fun is it to make fun of Dallas fans? We don't have any compassion if you beat a Dallas team, and that's a non-serious thing.
Right.
But we can do the same thing in political arguments. We're excited when the other party's candidate fails. We're excited when people who don't believe like us fail. And it's a natural thing for us to do. That's why the Bible puts things like this in there, because the Bible has to push against our nature. So how important is compassion? It's infinitely important. And it's something that's against our nature, and we actually have to fight against.
Yeah. So if you inserted more compassion into our homes, if we inserted more compassion and love for others into our factories, or more compassion and concern for others into our schools, into our managers, into our universities, and into our churches, that would change the whole landscape.
Oh, yeah. I think we look at someone else's problems as not being a big deal. It's not that big of a deal. The 3-year-old that gets a hair on their hand, they're freaking out about it. They need the parent to take the hair off, and they're freaking out. Like, what's the big deal? Well, the problem is real to them.
Right.
And same thing can be to someone who maybe have a different political persuasion or the differences in genders or whatever. And we just have to come to the conclusion that it's serious to them. It really means something to them. And if you can have that heart, it does obviously change what you do in the home.
And so Jesus brings out that compassion is important to him. It is centric to his ministry. It's centric to his example. But then he brings out in the comparison with how the priest and the Levite dealt with this man and the Samaritan and how he dealt with the man, that compassion has to involve two things. It has to involve action, but it also has to involve real sacrifice. That if my concern for others doesn't make me act, then it really hasn't germinated. It hasn't really brought its fruit forth. But not just in civil actions or small actions, but there was real sacrifice. He had to stop his journey. He had to give his own beast to ride upon. He had to get involved in the process, kind of get his hands dirty. And then he had to continually pay. When he left, he told the innkeeper, whatever more charges there are, I'm going to give to you. So you're talking about having a heart decision that leads to action, and that action leads to real sacrifice.
So you mentioned that. It reminds me of a study they did on the Good Samaritan. So at university, they set up a situation where they had someone in a stairwell, and the person in the stairwell, they had them injured or sick or incapacitated. Did it to them on purpose. The person's an actor. And then they took 100 college kids, and 50 of them, they told them to take a certain route. And they said, you have to deliver this piece of mail to this office by this time. You must get it done at this time. It's very important to keep a schedule. And then they told the other 50 kids, do the same thing, but there's no time limit. You take the same exact route. We want you to take this route, but there's no time limit. So they did that. The people that had the time limit established onto them, the one that had the time limit put onto them, very few stopped and helped that person that was incapacitated in the stairwell. The people that had unlimited time, they were willing to stop, take time, make sure the person was okay. You talk about sacrifice. We hate sacrifice in our time. We are a very time-centric people. And so when you see, how compassionate are you? Well, it depends on how much time you have.
So this compassion was not just for, this teaching on compassion was not just for this gentleman that Jesus was dealing with. Obviously, throughout Scripture, we can see that it is the example of God all the way through the Old Testament. He loveth the stranger. He gives food and raiment to the widow and the orphan. It is obviously the mandate of the church. This is not just simply a good example, but it's commanded. When Jesus washed the disciples' feet, and he said, I've given you an example to follow. When he even told this man, he said, go and do thou likewise. And so this is something that I have to take personally, and that I'm really not fulfilling my duty as a Christian if I don't have compassion on other people.
I like that you used the term personally. I would imagine that will affect where the conversation's going.
You threw me for a loop.
I'm detecting your personal thing.
So this idea of compassion as a powerful motivator, as a mandate from God, as a directive from Jesus Christ, has actually been part of our society. It has driven many good, we'll say, political movements, has probably been behind, at least partially, the civil rights movement, and so on. And so there's a lot of good things that play out. Now, today, there are good people who are motivated by compassion to help others, especially in the political arena. And I will say they're willing to not only have compassion, but they're willing to act out on that compassion and actually make it into an action, but also sacrifice for that. And I'll just give you some examples on issues of government today. So there are folks who are very compassionate about inequality economically. So they feel like there are folks who are downtrodden, they are stuck in poverty, and so they are willing to advance a minimum wage. They want to help these people and elevate them out of poverty, and they're willing to pay more in taxes. They want more welfare programs. They want this so because their compassion is compelling them to do something about it, to actually sacrifice and to be involved in the process, and they're willing to put, in a sense, their money where their mouth is and elevate these folks out of poverty. Can you think of other examples?
Well, I mean, you mentioned this philanthropy idea. I mean, some of the richest men in our history, whether it's John D. Rockefeller or whatever, Andrew Carnegie specifically, those guys became great philanthropists towards the end of their lives. They had opportunities to give, and they did. I think even Warren Buffett has given a substantial amount to the poor or to charities. I think that's a normal thing. If you have great opportunity, you generally see people give generously. Dave Ramsey, the financial guru, talks about that consistently. There's 3 things to do with your money: give, save, spend. And giving is one of the primary things you should be doing with your money and should be a focus. It actually, what does your checkbook tell you? It tells you what your real values are. It tells you how you spend money.
And so we can take a couple other topics in the political arena today. Minorities. Folks feel bad about racism. They want to protect a minority, an African American or a Chinese or a Spanish, and they want to help them, they want to protect them, and they want laws to passed to outlaw hate speech. Their heart goes out to an immigrant that has escaped their home country, and so they want to provide food and housing and cell phones and so on to them. They feel bad about the climate, and there are folks who are compassionate about the earth, about the forests and the rivers. And so they are willing to give up freedoms. They're willing to pay more taxes. Their heart longs to fix these difficulties. Many, many examples where compassion is the driving force, trying to protect our school children, our most valuable resource. And I agree with that. Where they want to protect the school children, there is obviously a problem when people want to target the children, and they harm kids in a school environment. And so their heart goes out to those children, and they want to protect them. And so compassion compels them to make real sacrifices. The Palestinians, they see on the news many, many children who are suffering, many people who have been displaced, and they're compassionate towards Palestinians. And then we get to even reproductive rights, as what they're called anyway. And their heart longs to help a woman in distress. Perhaps she has an unexpected pregnancy. She's engaged in a one-night stand or some immoral behavior. But the man, he walks away, and he does not have anything to do with that child. And now her career, her college education, her life is upended, and their heart goes out to her. Or maybe she's in an abusive relationship, and she is now feels like the presence of a baby in her womb could put her in danger because the father of the child is going to be angry, or she's a young one and has the horrible experience of being abused, and somehow a child is the result of that. And so their heart, rightfully so, is compelled to act and to protect those people. Have you seen things like that?
Well, and I think you're making a great point, which is we can, if you have a different political persuasion, you don't want to feel compassion unto those who feel differently than you. And I think that goes both ways. But our job is to try to fit into someone else's shoes, as it were. Try to see it from their perspective, because most people are, we like to think, are reasonable. Now, we may disagree in the outcome of it, but hey, these are real people with real problems, and they're trying to come up with real solutions, whether we agree with them. And if you don't try to see it through their eyes, you're missing out on an opportunity for understanding. Yeah. What was the Stephen Covey comment on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Our job is to try to seek understanding from other people. Um,
Yeah. So I and you, of course, applaud compassion. We started with that's the mandate of Jesus. That's the example of Jesus. When compassion is extended, generally good things happen. And so, and we can see that that compassion or that compassionate spirit comes from God be making us in His image. Evolution has no compassion. Creation has no compassion, or the environment and nature has no compassion.
right.
The source of compassion is God, and God has put it in the humans to have a compassionate spirit. And so I want to say, first of all, that if people arrive at different conclusions, but they arrive at it through compassion, I want to say thank you for that compassion. I believe that it comes from a heart that is desiring to see change and to see people be helped generally. And like you brought out, if I don't understand someone's issue or someone's point of view, the first question I should ask is, why do you feel so passionate about that? Why do you extend compassion in that area? And there's probably a person or a story or an experience behind that, something that they're trying to help. And I may disagree with how they're doing it, but I do appreciate the fact that they're showing and extending compassion.
Well, and I think it's fair to say that how we grew up does build a little bit of our political or even religious perspectives. You know, if you grow up in Haiti or you grow up in Bangladesh or you grow up in an inner city or you grow up with a different parental situation, it certainly changes how you see the world. And if you don't take a step back to consider, at least consider what others are seeing, you can certainly miss the boat, or you can misjudge somebody's motives.
So compassion is needed. Compassion is a powerful motivator. Compassion is what Jesus wants, and it gives us the example. And compassion can affect real change. But my questions would be, could it be misguided? Could there be compassion that is incomplete or taken advantage of? Could there be compassion and sacrifice without full knowledge of how to help properly, or what are the ramifications of that help? Could there be excesses or abuses of someone's compassion? Someone's compassionate, and then someone else comes along and uses that for their advantage. What is it? What if my compassion does not actually help the problem? Those are some things that we struggle with.
Oh, I think that that's true. We want to help people. We'll kind of do more of a micro view of it, but there's sometimes when I'm dealing with, say, with a family member, maybe my wife or a daughter, and I want to actually fix their problem, and so I come at it at the wrong angle or the wrong intent, and they're not actually looking for me to fix the problem. They're more than willing to fix their own issue, or they don't want it fixed at all. They just want someone to listen to. And I think we see problems, or we perceive a problem, and we perceive it needs to get fixed a certain way, but we don't bring in enough information. We're not bringing in understanding, and we're certainly not enlisting all the people to actually figure out what a reasonable solution would be.
So good intentions do not always guarantee good results.
No, they do not.
So from this story, could we find biblical guidelines for proper compassion? Well, the first one I see in this passage of Scripture is facts and full information. The reason I think this is important is that when the Samaritan saw the man, he assessed his condition. He saw what he needed at that particular time. He bound up his wounds, he poured in oil, he put him on his beast, and then he carried him to the innkeeper. And then he assessed that for some reason his journey took him on his way. He could not stay with him, and so he secured help for him at that time. And if we kind of back up a little bit and just take a general view of this, the compassion was given to the need. The compassion was given specifically to what this person needed at the time, and how important it is to deal with facts and figures and information and get a full grasp of all the details and all of the pieces of the puzzle before we kind of charge in, as it were, and offer help. Facts and figures are extremely important to extending compassion.
Well, root cause. You're trying to figure out why this problem actually happened. And we can gloss over it and we can make assumptions. And sometimes those assumptions are right. Not that I think we've lived long enough. You can see a problem developing. You're like, well, I know what that problem is. Like, I can see it. My kids, they're going through an issue. Like, well, if they just do this, it would work. But there's a lot of problems where you have to take a step back. And there's different methodologies, let's just say, in the quality arena in, let's say, manufacturing that help us to actually determine what facts are. 5 whys. Ask the question why 5 times. Why are we doing this? We're doing it because of this. Why are we doing it because of that? We're doing it, and you drill down. But as we talked earlier about the Samaritan, the college kids who had time were able to fix the problem. Were able to help. The people that didn't have time suffered because of it. When we don't give ourselves the gift of time, we're not going to be able to give ourselves the gift of actually drilling down and finding facts. We're going to miss out.
Well, this idea of full information, sometimes the person who needs help does not actually have full information. It needs to be either drawn out of them, or they need someone to help assess the need. When we go to the doctor, we know the symptoms. We're very, very familiar with what's happening, but we don't know how to connect those. We may not know what we need, and so someone else needs to help draw that out of us. Also, we need to reassess on kind of a minute-to-minute basis what conclusions we come to, because the assessment I have right now is based on the information I have, but it could be easy to back ourselves into a corner by taking only a certain set of information, making assessment of that, making a decision, and then when something else comes in that challenges that or gives me a new perspective, it would be very easy for me to ignore that because I've already made my decision. So how important is it to continually be open to more facts and figures?
I would say this from a couple guys that study the Bible frequently. I have entered a Bible message assuming I was going to preach one thing because I wanted to preach something and I had this idea. I go to the passage and the passage actually corrects me and I actually go down a different path. Facts should dictate our conclusions. It shouldn't be our presuppositions.
Right.
I believe it to be true, so henceforth it is true. But it's so hard because I know I'm right.
Right.
That's our default. And if we give ourselves, we talk about the gift of time, but if we put our pride to the side and really think, am I in the right? Do I have good information? Am I an expert in this area? It goes much further than just saying, I know how to fix it.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's so important to educate yourself. In this day and age of quick fixes and sound bites and 30-second videos that deal with a topic, and then someone makes a conclusion off of that 30-second video, some wild thing, and then they get behind a cause with very little information. It's very important to read good books. Obviously, you can go to the internet and find these things, but constantly gathering information, constantly helping us to make the best decision possible with the information that we have. Now, obviously, it's built upon the truths of the Word of God. So we start with the Bible, that doesn't change, and then we add other facts and figures to the equation so we can make a fully informed decision. Now, that means there has to be free flow of information. And so in order for compassion to actually be successful, the government cannot hinder the free flow of information. I think it's fundamentally wrong for them to restrict information that disagrees with their position. I think it's important to give those positions and give that opinion and help people to have full information and let the people decide what they need to follow and what they don't. What do you think about the free flow of information?
From the government?
Yes.
Not much of a free flow. So, everyone has a perspective. They're trying to leverage what's going on in front of them. They're trying to promote their position. But it does take, again, removing pride to say, here's what's actually going on. Being in the counseling chamber and talking to people, it's very few times that the first meeting you have with somebody reveals all the problems that are actually going on. It's several times in. Again, it's a time issue. And certainly a government Ronald Reagan's famous quote, the 9 most frightening words in the English language, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Some people have bad motives. Some people are actually just looking to just benefit themselves, not the group in general. And so that can certainly restrict information.
Well, and like I said, especially when you're talking about things that we're trying to adapt to. If a certain model of temperature ranges produce a certain conclusion for the past 10 years, and then we make decisions based on that, and we say there's climate change and we need to adjust and we need to sacrifice and we need to make hard decisions, and then somebody else produces more information from a different region that either contradicts or changes or shifts that, we should be open to that information. And obviously all on the foundation of the Word of God. But this idea of that does not follow the information that I want produced because it doesn't support my decision is totally false and totally wrong. And it then risks misusing compassion. In order for biblical compassion to be extended properly, it needs full information and full facts, a continual basis on what is actually needed at this time. The second thing that we can see is that in order for compassion to be biblical and proper and actually accomplish what it needs to accomplish is that there is accountability for the one who gives and the one who receives. So the person who is receiving the compassion, the person who is actually receiving the gift, in this case, it's the wounded gentleman, there isn't much in the story that he physically did in transactional, okay? But he still was responsible for some things. He still had to accept the medicine that was given. He was responsible to do something. How important is it for there to be accountability, for there to be some transaction where the doctor gives the patient the medicine, but the patient is still responsible to take it?
Sure. I think, when you talk about the word accountability, the government will throw things out there like we have to have an accountability board and all that. Well, one of the greatest signs of organizational health is peer-to-peer accountability. It's the church member being accountable to another church member. It's the coworkers that are accountable one to another. And when you're giving somebody taxpayer money, if we're kind of getting to that point, there should be accountability back. As Milton Friedman said, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's some sort of transaction that's going on, some sort of assumption of responsibility, and whether or not it's the receiver or the giver, there has to be an accountability back and forth. And if there isn't, you're missing out on results.
Yeah, and so if we took the Samaritan and the wounded man, and we took that relationship and we extrapolated out to the music teacher to the student, the coach to the athlete, if we went to parent to child, we would say that there is help that is flowing one way. There's time, there's resources, there's knowledge, there's experience, but they are required to accept it and they're required to enact it. But then the person who is giving the resources, they have power, they have authority to decide how those resources are used. This idea of extend compassion and give to someone who is in poverty, but do not require them to submit to a drug test. Do not require them to take classes. Do not require them to do anything. In fact, when you give it, you have to have no strings attached. I don't think that's biblical compassion. In every area of society, we have compassion that is given and time spent, but we have a relationship where we feel that they are accountable to follow the advice given, and that only improves their situation.
So we think of things that are explicit and implied with accountability. There may be times when you're like explicit. If I do this for you, you will do this. It's a transactional thing. It's like buying something at a store. But there's also implied accountability. When my wife and I got married and we're going through our wedding vows, there wasn't like, I promise to come home most nights. Like that's implied.
Right.
And if you're providing help to somebody, it should be implied that there's some sort of expectation for how this transactional relationship is actually going to work out, or how it's going to vet, and things like a drug test for someone who's on public assistance. That shouldn't be out of bounds, and implied should be they'll do what it takes to continue to receive whatever assistance.
Well, I think it shows respect. The opposite of what people project on it. Some people say if you demand anything, then you're not respecting the person. Well, I think it's the exact opposite. If you demand nothing, you're showing disrespect. But when you give something and you're giving a helping hand, and then you say, do something to provide for yourself, do your part in the process. Don't take the free lunch, and actually you meet me halfway. You're extending respect to that individual. And I do believe that we can find this in this passage, because when the Samaritan dealt with the innkeeper about the wounded man's needs, he said, take care of him and I'll give you more to take care of him. So he was paying for the future recovery of the wounded man, but not the future excesses of the wounded man. He didn't say, I'll pay for his cigarettes and I'll pay for his booze and I'll pay for all of his parties. He said, I'll take care of his wounds. I'll take care of his needs. So there was a box that the innkeeper could charge back to the original giver. And I think fundamentally, much of this is broken because the government inserts itself between the compassion and the receiver. And so when you have that third party, it does not hurt the government to increase the giving to the wounded party. It doesn't hurt the government to extend more welfare. In fact, it helps the government because they get the votes. But the actual person who's sacrificing is over here. And I believe they have broken that relationship between the giver and the receiver. And it's much, much better if you connect it directly. They long since have removed the church from charity. But when the church, and of course I understand there were excesses and there were abuses and so on, and I never give any credit or any condonance to those at all, and it should have been done in a proper way. But when you have the giver as close as possible to the receiver, and you have that relationship, then they are both elevated.
And I think there's a greater interest in what's going on.
Yes.
So if I'm giving money directly to a charity, I am very interested in that charity and how they're operating. And then if I'm giving money to an individual directly, I'm very interested in that. If I was to give money, let's say to someone who's in need, a family member that was in need, I'd be very interested in how they're spending money. But if I give it to a third party that I never see, that I don't interact with, that has very little accountability to me, and then they're giving it, there's such separation there.
Yeah.
And the closer it is to me, the more accountability there really is, that peer-to-peer accountability.
Absolutely. There are two more points I want to make regarding how compassion can give good results. We've talked about how compassion involves accountability. We've talked about how compassion should involve full facts and full information. But I think also recognizing that compassion does involve other people. And this kind of goes back to the full information, but realizing that if I show compassion to this particular person, there might be a ripple effect. There might be an effect to other people that is unintended. And realizing that those unintended consequences that do involve other people should at least give me some check on what I do. And it should help me to hone in on and be more maybe targeted, or at least be a little more discreet or wise about how I give. And how do I see this in this passage? Well, the innkeeper was affected. And it kind of goes into the next point, which is compassion must be voluntary. One is compelled, it removes the love, it removes the compassion, really, and it's just compelled. And what happened with the Samaritan is, at the end, he had to leave, and so he left the wounded man in the care of the innkeeper. And there was no assumption that the innkeeper was compelled to do it, that the innkeeper would just simply bear the cost. The Samaritan said, I will repay you. I will bear the cost. I will not compel you, because I recognize it does affect you. So wrapping our minds around, what is my compassion? What is the ripple effect of my compassion? How does this affect other people? And making sure that compassion is always voluntary. Those are the kind of the final two linchpins in this process of compassion.
I think the government wants to volunteer you, and so that obviously that's a huge problem. But that voluntary giving is a big deal. We talk about sacrifice. Why does the government forcibly take money out of your paycheck to pay your taxes? Because if you had to write a check, or if you had to take a stack of cash and go down to the IRS agent every week, it'd be a much more painful process, and there'd probably be a lot more people upset with taxation, right? But when it just kind of happens behind the scene, you don't notice it as much. It's less painful. And so this compulsion through taxation, that's kind of the subject matter is, we just don't notice it as much. It's not a big deal. Well, we may not even see real taxes go up. It may just be the government spending more money now. And so we're like, oh, what's the big deal? Well, inflation and all this. Secondly, it actually takes away our ability to have compassion towards people. I mean,
Right.
real heartfelt compassion. We live in an industry, as it were, a vocation, a job, where we get to hold someone's hands when they're dying. We get to give them a hug. We get to pray with people. We get to actually talk someone through a real issue. Compelled giving, compelled help, it takes away a big component of actually being charitable, which is looking someone in the eyes and crying with them and really seeing it all the way through. It's actually made us less compassionate, not more compassionate, I think, as a whole.
Well, and we saw that in COVID, where the government was shocked when there was pushback from the mask mandate and the restrictions on public gatherings. And the reply was, well, why don't you just love your neighbor? I mean, you're a church. Why don't you just love your neighbor? Listen to us as we compel you to love your neighbor. And of course, we want to love our neighbor. But the problem with the government is they don't understand. Once you compel somebody to love their neighbor, you've eliminated the love. You've eliminated that choice. And for compassion to really operate properly, it has to be voluntary, and you have to understand, how far does this ripple effect go? What am I doing to help the problem? But what I'm doing actually helping the person, and does it negatively affect other people in the process? And so how do we apply this to modern day examples? Well, I can give a few. You can give a few. There are hardworking teachers and even administrators and superintendents and school board who love our children and who are compassionate for our children, and they want to do everything they can to help them. But that compassion has turned into eliminate parental involvement. We want all of these books that promote sexual ideologies that we don't believe in. We want them to be safe, and so we're going to take away guns from parents in their homes who have nothing to do with the issue. And so we have this love for children and compassion for children, which I applaud, that has led to many other issues and unintended consequences. They want to keep children safe, but then they'll go into somebody else's house, an innocent civilian, and say, just because you have this particular firearm, that represents a danger, even though that person never committed a crime, that person never did anything, and it's I believe, misguided compassion.
A little bit of a shift. I was thinking of the word love, and the word love is interesting. In 1 Corinthians 13, how's that word translated? Charity.
Yeah.
It's love in action. Who loves paying taxes?
Right.
No one loves paying taxes. Paying taxes is not charity. The government is not charity. The government can't extol love. All they can do is provide a government function. It's the church.
Yeah.
It's the community. It's the local charities, maybe if they're not even Christian-based. They're the ones that actually get to show their love. It's love in action. It's real charity. And you can't have that if the government's just taking and compelling. It has to be done as a voluntary action.
Absolutely. And I believe there are people who genuinely love and have compassion towards a woman that is carrying a baby, has horrendous circumstances surrounding that, is perhaps even has her life is in danger. Maybe there's been abuse, horrible circumstances, and their heart goes out to that woman. But that compassion means they feel like they should offer an abortion, and then a baby is killed. And I want people to understand, those who are pro-life, we very much care for that woman. But we also understand that misguided compassion for the woman could cost the life of the baby. and the baby's life should be taken into consideration. There's been a big push on protecting people from bullies and protecting minorities and making sure that there is a safe environment in society. And I 100% agree with that, that idea of protecting children and protecting people. But people have taken that to the point where they say we need to protect a transgender student, give them opportunity to play sports, and we don't care what happens with the girls' athletics. We don't care about the privacy of a girl in a locker room. We don't care about the privacy of a girl in a bathroom or a changing room. She can be exposed to nudity. She can be exposed to abuse. She can be exposed to all of these things because we are compassionate to one student. And I believe that's totally misguided. It's not understanding all of the facts and figures in what's going on and all the people that are affected by that.
The pervasive speech to go along with the compulsion of showering, the boys showering with the girls, etc., but the compulsion of speech too. Someone has a firmly held religious belief that God made a male and female, Genesis 1:27, and they say there's only two genders. I believe with all my heart, with what the Bible tells me, that there's only two genders. And you say, no. You actually have to call them by their preferred pronoun. Well, in a government perspective, you may have affect one of the transgendered person's civil rights, their ability to be called what they want. But you're actually affecting two of the students' or the parents' rights. First, the freedom of speech, the freedom to say what you want, even if it's viewed repugnantly in society. Secondly, is your religious convictions. And so we actually have to be really careful when the government decides what is okay to say, what is okay to do. And we've said it before, the best thing government can do is leave us alone, let people live, and then let society build those bumpers and those guardrails.
Yeah. So I get it. I understand. Compassion is a powerful motivator. Compassion is the fuel of many political movements. Compassion has accomplished much, and we would be better off as a people if we had more compassion at home, at work, at church, in society. We're better off to have compassion. And true compassion is action and sacrifice. But it's more than that. It has to have full information. You have to be constantly gathering more facts and figures, adjusting along the way, obviously having the Bible as your guideline, as your foundation, but understanding the whole, we'll say all the ingredients of the soup so you can help properly. It also has accountability for the one receiving it, to the one giving it, that the closer you can get those people together, the more it elevates the person that's receiving the help, and there has to be accountability. There should be accountability. And it takes into consideration everyone who's involved, all of the ripple effects. And it is also voluntary, that it should not be compelled. The truth is, a lot of times when those things are advanced, when we say, is there more information? Then immediately someone says, you're not compassionate. You don't care about people. You don't care about kids. You don't care about women because you're pro-life. You don't care about school children because you want to protect your ability to defend your own family in your home. And so you're for gun rights. And so therefore you don't care about little children. And that is just such a immature and simple and a small-minded way to defend your position by simply saying, you cannot ask us any information. You cannot demand any accountability.
It's a government for the people, and so people should have access. And I know there's like Freedom of Information Act and all that. It is super tough to get information from the government. People are like, well, it's freedom of information. Drilling down and getting that information, it's super difficult. We want transparency, and of course, that's one of the problems when government hosts and houses all these institutions. And what are the benefits of trying to move as much as you can away from the government and putting them into a private hands?
So those who are compassionate, I applaud your compassion. I applaud your willingness to do something, and I applaud your desire to really sacrifice. Here is my question to you. When you extend compassion, does it actually help the problem? Do you have full information? Are there people that are affected inadvertently, unintended, by your extending of the compassion? Make sure you have all the information. Make sure you make a knowledgeable decision. Ask questions. Be very suspicious if somebody doesn't want you to ask questions, doesn't want you concerned about other people in the process. God can give us guidelines for being able to show biblical compassion and proper compassion so that we can see real change in our society. Thank you so much.